This is Unforgettable Learning, where we talk to L&D visionaries, experts, and mavericks about performance, creativity, and tech. Subscribe to stay in touch. Serena Gonsalves-Fersch recently won the Colin Steed Award for Outstanding Contribution to Learning. She's the Global Head of Talent at Software One and has written a doctorate on the future of corporate L&D. In this episode, Josh and I meet Serena to discuss that win, world-class learning organisations, and where she believes the future of learning in the workplace is going, and our critical role in getting there. Hi, Serena. Welcome along. Lovely to meet you.
Hi, very nice to meet you too, Kate. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Josh and I have been looking forward to seeing you for a long time, and we wanted to know first, tell us, how did it feel to win the Colin Steed Award?
I wasn't expecting it. I remember walking into the awards ceremony with a seat as a judge, telling everybody that our firm wasn't up for any awards this year, so I was just there for the free bar, and then which made it great to be the last award of the night. And so I think there's a few videos going around of me, and they all look like that. So I'm still in disbelief, and I'm very humbled and very honored.
Well, I think it's wonderful. And I was really curious to know what it was you think that impressed the judges and really, you know, in the work that you do that's making a difference.
So I like I said, it's the only, there's no indication who's winning it each year. It's purely by recommendation of the industry. I'd like to think of three different aspects. So one, at Software One, we've actually managed to link business impact and ROI to absolutely every training, every learning intervention that we've designed.
Holy grail.
And exactly, right? I'd like to think so. And then we also tied it into our firm's ESG goals. We're a publicly listed company, and made it work around social mobility and social impact. We introduced small elements which helped get women back into the workplace, which gave young people from non-traditional routes of education a chance at a career in technology. And then we just didn't give them learning. We actually hired people at the end of it as well, and made them client-facing, so it proved the value of the learning. And I think when you start putting learning in business terms in commercial terms, it shows an appreciation for that you understand how a firm makes its money and why it exists in the first place. So I think that would have played a part in all of it. I'm also quite I do believe that in this world where knowledge is more freer than it has ever been before, there's so much access to information around the world. There must be a way to democratize what we do, to make things, to reimagine what the role is of the learning professional, because it can't be to make content anymore that exists. I think it's a combination of that. That's what the doctorate was about as well.
Can I just talk about the massive mic drop that Serena started off our conversation with? Like, oh, I just did the thing that everyone is trying to do in this industry and have been trying to do for decades, which is connect business priorities to learning goals. And so just wanted to acknowledge the very subtle opening of that statement, to be like, oh, well, that's probably why, and a realization now that this is anything close to the award that you won, of why you're here and talking to us today, is because you have actually done the thing. And I think that that's super important for us today to really try and extract how, why, how hard, how easy it is to get there, because it is an admirable thing to do. So just wanted to acknowledge that part of you being there to not just take in the bar, but to also receive an award is definitely a recognition of those, recognizing the business impact, and a little feather on your cap, also recognizing ESG goals. Not that that's something to be taken lightly. So congratulations, but also super excited to learn more.
However, I can share the purpose of the doctorate was always to give back to the industry what I've spent over 22 years in freely. There isn't enough of thought leadership out there. There isn't enough of real case studies out there that are coming from the people who actually spend time at the coalface. And I think that prompted me to go, everything that I will put out will be for everybody else I have learned from, because we're fundamentally socially constructed, where we learn from each other. There is no formula for how L&D works. There is no single methodology that will be successful. We all just learn from each other, and it would be quite ridiculous if we weren't learning, since that's what we peddle.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, why don't we start by talking a bit about world-class learning organizations and how you've built one. I mean, your contribution in terms of sort of tying impact to inputs, feels like a really great place to begin. But I mean, what do you think it takes to build a really world-class learning organization? How have you done that? And tell us where you've done that.
So I'm going to say the first thing is how you position yourself. It irritates me no end when L&D people demand this fictitious seat at tables or wonder why they're the afterthought. And I keep saying, you keep putting out the same bait, you're going to catch the same fish. If you keep positioning yourself as somebody who says, yes, when they shout, I want a course, and you go, yes, sir, 3 bags full, sir, then you put it out, and then you've got to justify why you spent the money on the course and whether it had real impact. So I decided to do away with that entire narrative. I was lucky with Software One, where I was given a blank canvas, set up a corporate university that will help us reduce time to competency, reduce the cost of our talent pipeline, and reduce attrition, because these were really, really big problems. It was also, how do we address the massive technical skills shortage, where companies which don't have the big brand names, the Googles, the Microsoft, the Apples, how are they competing for talent? So rather than get part of this revolving door, I had a remit and a blank slate to go and build what I wanted. So you first start with what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to reduce attrition. You're trying to make sure that whatever learning you provide is as close to the client impact as possible, or the ability to, oh my goodness, I've lost a word, to implement? No. To practice, to put it in place, the just-in-time learning. I'm using words. Time between you learning a concept and actually
implementing
speed to competency.
Yeah, it's the speed to that's all of that. Yes, it was reduced. It was, I looked at concepts like Bob Mosher's 5 Moments of Need. I started looking at when it was that people could actually show business impact. And I started talking to the business in a language they understood. I started understanding their pipeline, their resourcing models, the time people spend on the bench, the time they need to cross-skill, the time they need to upskill. And that was what the starting point was. And then you start looking at, it's not just technical skills, it's soft skills come into this as well. How do I have some sort of presence and gravitas when I speak to a client? How do I do critical thinking or problem solving, where I can take a look at the technical content and apply it into a business or a client problem context? So before you start putting pen to paper and building anything, you start with the business problem, because the more time you spend doing your needs analysis upfront, the less time you're spending justifying why you did what you did later. It becomes self-evident and nobody asks.
Do you think that's because it sounds so obvious, doesn't it? It sounds so obvious, but it's obviously critical. Why are people not doing that?
Well, we start with, you can bleep this, but we start with a sort of spray and pray approach. We start with the assets we have, and with this fallacy that if you build it, they will come. So we start with content libraries, and we start with learning platforms, and we start with this mistaken belief that every action gets a reaction. Like, I do a training, you will learn, and that hasn't happened since probably school for most people. If then,
if it even worked then, yeah.
even then, yes. So we start with building an organization in a way that L&D believes an organization structure of learning works. So I'll have, one learning manager, 2 business partners, 3 instructional designers, 4 LXP platform people. And then you go, right, now we've got the structure. What do we populate it with? As opposed to flipping this around and going, what is the firm's strategy? Then what is the firm's people strategy? How are we tied into strategic HR, to talent acquisition? I give examples like, you take talent acquisition. They're the ones bringing in the talent. They are closer to the business. They get to see actual workforce planning. How aligned are we with what skills are coming into the business? And then someone doesn't make it through probation, and they'll write, oh, I wasn't trained or supported enough. And then someone calls L&D and, oh, wait, we were not involved when the business was making its workforce planning plans. We were not involved during the hiring process. We barely were involved in the onboarding. And 3 months later, we had to figure out how this dude could be successful, even though we had no part in how he got here or she got here. I think we're always in at the wrong time, and we're always separated from the context of the business, which is why we became that afterthought.
I'm trying really hard to hold back the smile that I have while I'm hearing you talk this whole time, Serena, because it is just so extremely resonant for me. I recently gave a talk on trying to help learning leaders become more strategic. And I kind of have this moment where I arrive on something called the compelling question, where it's like frame the learning challenge in the business challenge. And I sort of give a few requirements for what every compelling question needs to have. And the sort of the jaw drop moment, depending on who's sitting in the audience, is I say the compelling question should have 0 reference to learning or training. And so I start doing a little bit of shorthand now when I'm speaking to people about their priorities. And I kind of put a kind of informal clock on for when they start talking about learning and training. And I was just paying attention to when Kate was asking the question of, how did you do this? And I start the clock off. And you went to attrition, talent pipeline, understanding what the business needs, what were the skills behind it. And I stopped monitoring the clock because I was like, this is exactly, and one of my kind of passion projects is understanding the habits of strategic learning leaders. This is exactly the type of habit that you exemplify so well. By the way, this isn't turning into a Serena love fest, but it just happens to be all of a sudden. I'm sure you don't mind. Of just your vocabulary and cadence for how you approach it, is that you spent 5 minutes talking about the business before you even started talking about learning. And I think that's really important for people to understand, is that when you're given a blank canvas, run to where the business is, not to where the learning is.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And that comes from the research. So there are approximately, if you look at startup statistics, there are approximately 152,000 startups a day. Even if only 10%, and the current rate's about 8%, are successful, that's a day. So the part where you will never work with a startup or a hypergrowth that's bought a startup, or an established company that's changing its operating model or moving into a mode that feels almost entrepreneurial, doesn't exist. It just doesn't. And the ones where it even old manufacturing companies will start using, from automation to robotics, it will change. So if we are not understanding that context, then anyone can buy a content library, anyone can put in place an LXP, anyone can Google, because I'm guaranteeing you, if you ask any firm, anybody in any firm, when you don't know something, what do you do? They'll say, I'll ask my mate or I'll Google. Your LMS doesn't crack the top 5. That's if you're lucky. So what is then the role of the learning person in this new age world? And we cannot be the only part of the business that doesn't understand the business. We can't be. HR has to, finance has to, every other support function has to. We cannot be the only ones who are trying to upskill a workforce while not understanding the context of that workforce. So I think our roles will fundamentally change. And the more we worry about being edutainers and keepers of the content, the less relevant we will be. We'll still be there. There'll always be that checkbox needed for when you report to shareholders. We develop our people. But
it's almost a reflection of sort of it's almost like time's up on our industry to a certain degree in terms of, to your point of edutainment. There was a time and place where digitalization was a priority, where engaging learning was a priority, coming out of very legacy rote attitudes to what we think training is being. And, I think you hear it. I think, we hear it. It's like, okay, but now can we finally talk about impact? The rope's been given for kind of like porting whatever we're doing into a digital environment, trying to make it somewhat appeasing to people. But now can we actually take this seriously and actually, to your point, show up to the business with we're a value creation center. We're not a cost center.
Yeah. I have never published a report on I don't have happy sheets. Do I have? No, we don't have happy sheets across the whole Software One Academy. I've never published a report with happy sheets, and I've definitely never published a report with butts on seats. I can say butts on seats.
It's my favorite metric. If I were to say, the first time I heard seat time, I was like, what's that? It's like, it's a reflection of you sitting on thing and taking. Like, that's a thing? It remains today my favorite term in our industry, seat time.
I do not know how many hours were spent on training in the Software One Academy in the past 3 and some years. I don't know what people, what the consumption rate of their content was. I don't calculate how long they spent on the LXP. I do not know. And I know that nobody in our team knows. What I do know is how quickly were they billable. What I do know is how quickly they could use the certifications on client side. What I do know is how long, because we calculate attrition up to 1.5 years, and then of course there are other factors which determine it. So I know that our retention rate is 97% after 1.5 years. Still, I can tell you the numbers, the value, how much we reduced attrition in very difficult skill acquisition areas. And that's the stuff I report. I can tell you where a client has been or a provider has been so happy with the quality of the people we got. We've got discounts on our services. That's the sort of stuff we report on. I do not know how many happy sheets or bums and seats we can. Now I made that even worse. We're going to scroll quickly.
It's all good.
It's the name of your next album, Serena. Happy Sheets and Bums on Seats. It's got a nice...
No more.
Yeah. A quick follow-up to that, because this is something that I actually find... Yes, we joke about learning time and learning hours a lot, but I actually think this is quite a serious priority for a lot of people in organizations. I was speaking to a CLO the other day, speaking of their priorities, and all best intentions. This is a very different language of conversation than the one that we're having today. And they arrived on, our biggest goal for this year is to increase training time, learning time from X amount of hours to X amount of hours, which to their CEO was making learning a priority. And that's how you make learning a priority. How do you respond to that?
Look, learning, the L&D function and learning is so contextual, right? I work for a tech firm. If we get it wrong in L&D, no one is dying. you have the ability to try something, to put in place, if it doesn't work, to pivot, to try a new approach. You have the ability to incorporate it more. You cannot do this if it's a pharma industry. You can't do this with the NHS. You cannot do this where the governance of is so high, where the legal requirements are so high that certain training and formal learning has to take place. You can't. It's the wrong context for it. So I'm perfectly happy, and I believe it's completely reasonable for a company to go, I would like you to spend X amount of time learning and upgrading your skills. My issue is with how then that is measured, because I can decide in my firm that I would like to spend that going and shadowing, from my personal experience, the comp and bens team, because I know very little. It's my weakest area of HR. So I will say that I'm going to spend about half a day or a month or half a day a quarter, because they don't want the stalker around, shadowing a different team. I'm going to say that I will sit at one of our shared service centers and listen in on calls. I'm learning. The problem is not the fact that we allocate hours for learning. That's great. It's wonderful. The problem is L&D believes that if we cannot measure it, then learning hasn't happened. So we wouldn't accept that sort of, I shadowed, I played around, I went and broke something on GitHub and then tried to put it back together again. We tend to quantify learning by what's been attended and consumed. And that's where the system failed. I believe in industry averages. I do think, you do spend approximately a day, a month, or 2 days a month. And in some cases, it's even more learning. You translate that into hours. You give that ability to your people. Completely agree with that. I think that the word learning has become too pigeonholed. And that's the problem. That if we didn't measure it, if we didn't roll it out, if it's not sitting on the LMS, if it's not part of the content library, it couldn't possibly have happened. You couldn't have learned that by yourself. What is wrong with you?
I'm curious then what the role of the employee is in this learning organization, because presumably they're quite self-sufficient, they're self-driven, they're self-motivated. What do you see their role is in their learning in this organization?
So for me, it's really simple, and the doctorate brought this up. And there's also a lot of discussion in the market around this. Growth mindset, Carol Dweck, Amy Edmondson's psychological safety, and a systems thinking. People always talk about performance consulting, but performance consulting always assumes that we do this with the aim of improving performance, and therefore performance improves because we do this. And most often learning cannot, in an organization, human beings are not that predictable enough for us to do that. So let's move to what I believe the role of a learning leader is. I believe the role of the learning leader is to provide a framework that connects to other areas of the business, like talent, strategic HR, sales, services, and whatever other functions you have. And for an individual to feel safe within that framework to try out different things. So we will move away from managing the human to doing to managing the framework. Well, think of yourself as a coach or a football manager. You're sort of in the sidelines. You're not dictating play. You're not shouting out. I mean, I know they shout out, but you're not the one shouting out for the purpose of my analogy. But you have provided enough of a framework within which they can move around to be successful. The scaffolding of a building is another analogy I use in the doctorate, where I go, that framework is what you're responsible for. How people run around and move in the building, that's them. And they'll go and knock themselves against the pillar, they learn, and then they should feel safe that, okay, now I got this and I will reframe my path. I think the role of the learning leader will be broader, connected to OD and talent and HR and the fundamental systems way of the way an organization works.
Such a fantastic response. I was just going to say, Josh, that for the longest time, I've just been thinking about the optimal place, which is always high autonomy, always high trust. And you seem to have kind of cracked that where you are and be facilitating an environment where people can come and learn and do what they need to for their own growth.
Yes, cracked it is very generous.
Okay,
Thank
all right.
I
Well, you won the award, so.
There's always stuff to learn. It would be weird. All the circumstances where this doesn't work in. Everything, comes together in a lemony snicket series of events that has to make it work. But that's my point. Learning is so contextual. We take what works with organizations. Another example, where you were saying, and some people dictate the number of hours. Some people say that you have 500 euros each per month or per quarter. Go forth and do whatever you want with it. So whether it's a money thing or a time thing, and that might work in their context. If you're 340,000 people in your organization and you give everybody 500 euros a month, yeah, maybe that's not going to work for your L&D functions, budgets. But I think everything is so contextual that if you just let go of the number of elements we believe we need to control and focus on business outcomes and focus on the framework of an organization and recognize that humans learn best by doing, by trying, by failing, by picking up and doing it all over again. I think your role becomes very different.
You mentioned something that I think is just so indicative of where we are right now in this moment. And that is sort of being the grand facilitator and the connective tissue. And to circle back to what we spoke of at the top of this conversation, what you are doing is trying to be that connective tissue with the business, to represent all facets of the business and then speak back to, what do you need? How can we help? And I think part of the problem right now with L&D sort of being this output activity center of the business is that there is no connective tissue. It is, we're just going to turn on the grand L&D machine of stuff and we're going to keep it rolling. And what you're talking about as a future makes a ton of sense, but it starts with that sort of macro level of, we need to first be that connective tissue to the business so that we can be that connective tissue facilitator to our people.
I'm in a fortunate position, Josh, because I look after the talent management function as well. So I do have performance and I do have succession and career paths and competencies under me. So I'm in a fortunate position. We'll always need that machine. We will always need that churn. We will need those times for onboarding, for compliance, for new manager training. There'll be many, many circumstances where we will need that machine. We will need those people getting out of the context of their jobs, finding their way into classrooms or modules online and consuming content. We'll never lose the machine. What I'm essentially trying to say is that we've only focused on that machine. We've not focused on that connective bit. I remember this particular one because I spoke with 68 CHROs, CEOs, and CLOs when I made the doctorate. And I used to ask the learning leaders, every single organization has performance management, right? Everyone. And everyone's goals are, these are my performance goals, these are my development goals, these are my organization goals. And I'd ask the L&D leader, have you seen people's development goals? Have you seen the outputs of their performance management? You don't need the names. You just need a summary of what they asked for, because that should technically be your needs analysis for the entire year. That's what your entire workforce said they want to learn. I don't even think it was so insignificant, the number that said that they actually went and looked at it, that it didn't even register. Most L&D people don't start there. So you're not connected to the way the organization rewards people, promotes people, develops people, and keeps an eye on whether it keeps them or doesn't keep them in the firm. And that is all your data. So I think the issue is we got so obsessed with that machine part of it. We've forgotten everything else about the human, and we started judging ourselves on the efficiency of our machine too. We pigeonholed ourselves. same bait, same fish.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to stay up to date with leading lights from L&D and leave us a review to let us know what you think.